The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the sterile courtroom as Naomi sat perfectly still, her dark eyes fixed on the mahogany table before her. Across from her, Richard smirked while his girlfriend Vanessa leaned back in her chair, designer heels clicking against the floor as she laughed. The sound echoed through the nearly empty room like broken glass. "Look at her," Richard said, his voice dripping with contempt. "She won't even speak. Just sits there like a scared little mouse." He adjusted his tie, the same blue one Naomi had bought him for their anniversary 3 years ago. 15 years of marriage and this is what I get. A wife who can't even defend herself. Vanessa, her red hair perfectly styled and her black suit tailored to perfection, slid a stack of papers across the polished table. Her manicured nails tapped against the wood as she smiled. "Sign these, Naomi. Now." Her voice was sharp, cutting. "We both know you can't afford to fight this. You have no money, no job, no skills. Richard's been supporting you all these years and now it's time to face reality." Naomi's hands remained folded in her lap. She wore a simple black dress, nothing fancy, nothing that would suggest she had any real worth. Her natural hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore no jewelry except her wedding ring, which felt heavy on her finger now. "The papers are simple," Vanessa continued, her lawyer voice taking over. "Richard gets the house, the cars, and his business. You get to keep your personal items and whatever small amount is in your checking account. It's more than fair, considering you brought nothing to this marriage." Richard nodded eagerly. "She's right. I built everything we have. The house, the business, our whole life. She just existed." He looked at Naomi with disgust. "I wasted 15 years on someone who can't even get a real job. Do you know how embarrassing it was, telling people my wife was just a housewife?" Vanessa laughed again, the sound making Naomi's skin crawl. "Oh, Richard, you're being too kind. At least housewives cook and clean. What exactly did Naomi do all day? Read books? Water plants?" She turned to Naomi with mock concern. "Honey, in the real world people need skills to survive. Lucky for you, Richard's feeling generous." The judge, an older man with gray hair and tired eyes, looked at the papers. "Mrs. Thompson, do you have legal representation?" Naomi shook her head slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "No, Your Honor." Richard and Vanessa exchanged triumphant looks. This was going exactly as they had planned. 4 months they had been preparing for this moment, making sure Naomi would have no way to fight back. They had convinced her she was worthless, that she had no options, that her only choice was to accept whatever crumbs they offered. "Then I'll give you some time to review these documents," the judge said, though his tone suggested he saw this as a formality. "This is a significant decision." Vanessa leaned forward, her perfume mixing with the antiseptic smell of the courtroom. "Your Honor, if I may, Mrs. Thompson has had months to prepare for this. We've been more than patient. She knows exactly what she's signing, and she knows it's the best offer she's going to get." "That's right," Richard added, his voice growing louder with confidence. "She's had every opportunity to get a lawyer, to fight this if she wanted to. But she knows she can't win. She knows she doesn't deserve anything more than what we're offering." Naomi's eyes moved slowly from Richard to Vanessa, then to the papers spread before her. The divorce decree. The property settlement. The financial agreement that would leave her with almost nothing. On paper it looked like the end of her world. Richard and Vanessa saw a broken woman with no fight left in her. What they didn't see was the small smile that flickered across Naomi's lips for just a moment before disappearing. What they didn't know was that the scared, helpless woman sitting before them was an act she had been perfecting for months. What they couldn't imagine was that the same woman they were mocking owned more wealth than both of them combined. Naomi reached for the pen Vanessa had placed next to the papers. Her hand trembled slightly as she picked it up, and Richard practically bounced in his seat with excitement. "Finally," he muttered. "I can't wait to be free of this dead weight." Vanessa nodded approvingly. "Smart choice, Naomi. You're saving yourself a lot of embarrassment and legal fees you can't afford anyway." The pen hovered over the signature line. Naomi looked up at Richard, the man she had loved for 15 years, the man who was throwing away everything they had built together for someone who saw him as nothing more than a stepping stone. Then she looked at Vanessa, the woman who thought she was so clever, so superior, so untouchable. "Actually," Naomi said quietly, setting the pen down, "I think I need more time to consider this." Richard's face turned red. "What? No. You're signing those papers today. We're not going through this charade again." Vanessa's confident expression faltered slightly. "Naomi, be reasonable. This is the best deal you're going to get. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." but Naomi was already standing, smoothing down her simple dress. "I'll be in touch," she said softly and walked toward the door. Behind her, she could hear Richard's angry voice and Vanessa's sharp protests, but she didn't turn around. She had work to do, and it was time to show them exactly who they were dealing with. The scared little mouse was about to become a lion. 6 months earlier, Naomi had been washing dishes in the kitchen of their suburban home when she heard Richard's phone buzz on the counter. It was late, almost midnight, and he was in the shower. The message notification lit up the screen, and without thinking, she glanced over. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. The things I want to do to you." Her hands had stopped moving in the soapy water. "Via Vanessa." Richard's new business lawyer, the one he'd been talking about constantly for the past month. The one who was so smart, and really understands the business world, and makes things happen. Naomi had dried her hands slowly, picked up the phone, and read through months of messages. Hotel rooms. Dinner dates while Naomi was supposedly visiting her sister. Business trips that weren't business at all. Plans to get rid of the dead weight in Richard's life so they could be together properly. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was how they talked about her. How they laughed about her. How they saw her as nothing more than an obstacle to their happiness. "She's so pathetic," one message from Vanessa read. "Does she really think you're working late every night? She's either incredibly stupid or incredibly desperate." "Both," Richard had replied. "But not for much longer. Once we figure out how to get her out of the picture without losing everything I've built, we can stop pretending." What they didn't know, what Richard had never bothered to learn in 15 years of marriage, was that Naomi had been building something too. While he thought she was just reading books and watering plants, she had been working. Quietly. Carefully. Under her maiden name. Naomi Rodriguez had started small, investing the money her grandmother had left her in a tech startup run by her college roommate. When that company sold for millions, she invested in 3 more. When those succeeded, she branched out into real estate, then renewable energy, then biotechnology. For 12 years, while Richard dismissed her as a useless housewife, Naomi had been building a business empire. She owned parts of companies across the country. She had investment accounts Richard didn't know about, properties in other states, business partnerships with some of the most successful entrepreneurs in America. The simple checking account Vanessa mentioned in court, the one with a few $1,000s? That was her spending money. Her real wealth was hidden in a web of corporations and partnerships that would take a team of forensic accountants months to unravel. She had kept it secret not because she was hiding from Richard, but because she had learned early in their marriage that his ego couldn't handle her success. The one time she had mentioned wanting to start a business, he had laughed and told her to leave the real work to people who knew what they were doing. So she had smiled, nodded, and built her fortune in silence. After discovering the affair, Naomi had spent 3 weeks researching Vanessa. She learned about her practice, her clients, her reputation. She discovered that Vanessa had been involved in several questionable cases, walking the line between aggressive representation and outright misconduct. She also learned that Vanessa's law firm was struggling financially, and that she needed Richard's divorce settlement to pay off her debts. Then Naomi had researched Richard's business. What she found surprised even her. While she had been building legitimate wealth, her husband had been cutting corners. There were tax discrepancies, missing invoices, contracts with companies that didn't quite exist. Nothing too obvious, but enough to cause serious problems if someone started looking closely. For 6 months, Naomi had played the perfect victim. She had cried at the right moments, seemed confused by legal terms, asked desperate questions about how she would survive on her own. She had hidden her real phone, her real computer, her real life, and let them see only what they expected to see. She had also been documenting everything. Every lie Richard told. Every unethical thing Vanessa did. Every piece of evidence that would eventually destroy them both. The night before the court hearing, Naomi had sat in her home office, the one Richard thought she used for reading and online shopping, and made a series of phone calls. To her real lawyers. To her business partners. To people who knew exactly who Naomi Rodriguez was and what she was capable of. "Are you sure about this?" her attorney had asked. "We could end this quickly. Show them what you really have, make them back down." "No," Naomi had said, her voice steady. "Let them think they've won. Let them show their true colors. I want everyone to see exactly who they really are." Now, sitting in her car outside the courthouse, Naomi pulled out her real phone and made another call. "James? It's me. How did the meeting go?" James Richardson, her business partner and the only man who had ever seen her real worth, laughed softly. "Better than expected. We got the contract. The expansion is approved. By this time next year, the company will be worth twice what it is now. Good, Naomi said, watching Richard and Vanessa argue through the courthouse windows. I'm going to need every penny for what comes next. You're really going through with this? They made their choice, Naomi said. Now they get to live with the consequences. As she drove away from the courthouse, Naomi felt lighter than she had in months. The scared, helpless woman Richard and Vanessa saw in that courtroom was about to disappear forever. It was time to show them who she really was. The mouse was done playing dead. 3 days after the courthouse encounter, Naomi sat in the glass-walled conference room of Sterling, Wong and Associates, one of the most prestigious law firms in the city. The woman across from her, Patricia Sterling, was nothing like Vanessa. Where Vanessa was flashy and loud, Patricia was quiet confidence. Where Vanessa wore her ambition like jewelry, Patricia let her reputation speak for itself. I've reviewed everything you sent me, Patricia said, spreading documents across the mahogany table. Your husband and his girlfriend have made several critical mistakes. Naomi nodded, her demeanor completely different from the woman who had sat trembling in court. Here she was sharp, focused, every inch the successful businesswoman she had hidden for so many years. What's our strongest position? Fraud for starters, Patricia replied, pulling out a thick folder. Your husband has been hiding income from his business. These tax documents you provided show a pattern of underreporting that goes back 3 years. The IRS will be very interested in this. She opened another folder. Then there's the matter of your joint accounts. While you were secretly building your empire, he was secretly draining your shared resources. He moved money into accounts he thought you didn't know about, money he planned to claim as his own in the divorce. And Vanessa? Patricia's smile was sharp. Ms. Rivers has bigger problems than she realizes. I've spoken to several colleagues about her recent cases. There's a pattern of aggressive tactics that cross ethical lines. Intimidating opposing parties who don't have representation. Making false statements about legal precedents. Using her position to gain unfair advantage. She pulled out a recording device. This conversation you recorded last week, where she discussed bribing a court clerk for information about the judge's preferences. That alone could get her disbarred. Naomi remembered that conversation. She had gone to Vanessa's office, playing the desperate ex-wife looking for a payment plan for legal representation she couldn't afford. Vanessa had been so confident, so sure of her superiority, that she had bragged about her methods for winning cases. The beauty of this, Patricia continued, is that they've built their entire strategy on the assumption that you're powerless. They haven't prepared for any real opposition. What about the business contracts Richard showed me? The ones he claimed proved his sole ownership of everything? Patricia laughed, a sound nothing like Vanessa's harsh cackle. Forgeries. Poorly done ones at that. We've had them analyzed by experts. The signatures don't match, the paper is wrong, even the legal language is incorrect. Your husband may think he's clever, but he's not nearly as smart as he believes. So what's our next move? We file a motion to dismiss their divorce petition on grounds of fraud. Then we file our own petition with the real financial disclosures. Patricia's eyes gleamed. I think it's time Richard and Vanessa learned who they're really dealing with. That same afternoon, Naomi drove to the office building where she conducted her real business. Unlike Richard's small storefront operation, this was 40 floors of gleaming steel and glass in the heart of the financial district. She owned 3 floors outright and had partnerships with companies on 6 others. Naomi. James Richardson stood up as she entered his corner office. At 38, he was successful, kind, and had been trying to ask her out for dinner for the past 2 years. She had always declined, citing her marriage, but James had waited patiently, never pushing, always supportive. How are you holding up? He asked, concern evident in his voice. Better than they think, Naomi replied, settling into the chair across from his desk. Patricia says we have them on multiple counts of fraud. Good. They deserve whatever they get. James pulled out his own set of files. I've been doing some research on Richard's business like you asked. The man is in serious trouble. He opened the first folder. He owes 3 suppliers more than $50,000. He's been lying to them about payment schedules for months. There's also this. He handed her a document. A lawsuit filed against him last month by a former employee claiming wage theft. I never heard about any lawsuit. Because he's been intercepting all the legal mail. The employee's lawyer has been sending notices to your home address, but Richard's been hiding them from you. James shook his head in disgust. He's been forging your signature on legal documents, claiming spousal privilege to make decisions without your knowledge. Naomi felt a cold anger settle in her chest. What else? His business license is about to be suspended for failure to pay taxes. He owes the state almost $20,000. And here's the interesting part: he's been using the money from your joint accounts to pay his personal debts, not business expenses. So when Vanessa talked about him supporting me all these years, he was actually living off your money while running his business into the ground. James leaned back in his chair. Naomi, if you had divorced him legitimately with proper legal representation, he would have owed you money, not the other way around. That evening, Naomi sat in her real home, the penthouse apartment she had bought under her business name 3 years ago. Richard thought she visited her sister every Wednesday night. In reality, she came here to work, to think, to plan for a future she was finally ready to claim. Her phone rang. Richard's name appeared on the screen. Hello. She kept her voice small, defeated. Naomi, we need to talk. Richard's voice was strained. About the divorce papers. I told you I need more time. No, you don't understand. We can't wait much longer. There are complications with my business. I need this settled quickly. Naomi almost smiled. Patricia had been right about filing the motion to dismiss. Word was getting out that someone was looking into Richard's finances, and he was panicking. What kind of complications? Nothing for you to worry about, he said quickly. Just some paperwork issues. Look, if you sign the papers this week, I might be able to give you a little more money. Maybe $5,000 instead of $3,000. $5,000. As if that was a fortune to her. I don't know, Richard. This is my whole future. Your future is whatever I decide to give you, he snapped, his mask slipping. You have nothing without me. You are nothing without me. I understand, Naomi said quietly. I'll think about it. After hanging up, she made one more call. Patricia? It's Naomi. I think it's time to file those papers. All of them. You're sure? I'm sure. Let's show them exactly what they're dealing with. The next morning, Richard and Vanessa would wake up to a very different world than the one they had gone to sleep in. And Naomi would finally stop hiding who she really was. Richard stretched contentedly in Vanessa's king-sized bed, watching her get dressed for work. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of her downtown apartment, and he felt like a man who had finally gotten everything he deserved. I still can't believe how easy that was, he said, reaching for his coffee. 15 years I wasted on that woman, and she just rolled over without a fight. Vanessa adjusted her silk blouse and smiled at him in the mirror. Honey, you're giving her too much credit. There was never going to be a fight. Naomi doesn't have the brains or the backbone for it. It had been 2 weeks since their courthouse victory, and Richard had moved out of his old house immediately. Naomi had signed the papers the day after his phone call, just as he knew she would. The house was his, the business was his, and his bank account was fuller than it had been in years. I keep thinking about her face when she signed those papers, Vanessa said, applying lipstick with practiced precision. Like a kicked puppy. I almost felt sorry for her. Don't, Richard replied firmly. She made her choice 15 years ago when she decided to be useless. I gave her a good life, a nice house, everything she needed, and what did I get in return? Nothing. Vanessa turned to face him, her red hair catching the morning light. Well, you won't have that problem with me. I know how to pull my own weight. Richard smiled and pulled her down for a kiss. This was what he had always wanted: a woman who matched his ambition, who understood success, who could be a real partner instead of dead weight. Speaking of pulling weight, he said, I was thinking we should start looking at houses. Something bigger than this place. Something that shows the world what we've accomplished. Vanessa's eyes lit up. I know just the neighborhood. There are some beautiful properties in Millfield Heights. A little expensive, but with your settlement money and my practice, we can afford it. Richard nodded enthusiastically. The settlement had given him almost everything: the house he could sell for a good profit, his business without any of Naomi's theoretical claims on it, and access to all their joint accounts. He estimated his net worth at close to $500,000 now that he didn't have to support a wife who contributed nothing. I made some calls yesterday, he continued. There's a developer who wants to buy our old house. He's offering $20,000 over asking price. Perfect. And my practice has been growing too. I landed 3 new corporate clients this month. Vanessa straightened her skirt. Richard, we're going to have everything we ever wanted. After Vanessa left for work, Richard drove to his office feeling more confident than he had in years. His business, Thompson Construction Services, wasn't huge, but it was his. He had built it from nothing, and now it was finally paying off. He spent the morning calling suppliers, planning new projects, dreaming about expansion. Without Naomi's constant questions about money and budgets, he could think bigger, take risks, really grow the company. Mr. Thompson? His secretary Helen knocked on his office door. There's a man here from the state tax office. He says he needs to speak with you about some discrepancies in your filings. Richard frowned. Discrepancies? What kind of discrepancies? He didn't say. Should I send him in? Richard straightened his tie and nodded. This was probably just some routine audit, maybe triggered by the divorce filing. Nothing to worry about. The man who entered was tall, thin, and carried a briefcase that looked like it weighed 50 pounds. Mr. Thompson? I'm Agent Harrison from the State Revenue Department. I need to discuss some issues with your business tax returns. Of course, Richard said, gesturing to a chair. I'm always happy to cooperate with state officials. Agent Harrison opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. We've received some information suggesting that your reported income doesn't match your actual receipts. Can you explain these discrepancies? Richard looked at the papers. They were copies of contracts he remembered signing, but the numbers looked wrong. I'm not sure what you're seeing. These all look correct to me. According to these bank records, you received payments totaling $43,000 more than you reported on your tax returns last year alone. Agent Harrison's voice was neutral, professional. That's a significant oversight. Richard's mouth went dry. There might be some confusion with the bookkeeping. My wife used to help with the financial records, and since the divorce. Yes, about that. Agent Harrison pulled out another document. We also have questions about these joint account withdrawals. Large cash payments made to your business account from personal funds. Can you explain the source of these payments? The room seemed to be getting smaller. Richard loosened his tie. Those were just personal investments in the business. My own money. Except according to the divorce records you filed, you claimed sole ownership of all business assets and denied any spousal contributions. Agent Harrison's tone remained even. Either you lied to the tax department about the source of funds, or you lied to the court about your wife's financial contributions. Which is it? Richard felt sweat beading on his forehead. I think I should call my lawyer. That's certainly your right, Agent Harrison said, closing his briefcase. But I should inform you that this is now a formal investigation. We'll need you to provide all financial records for the past 3 years, and we'll be conducting interviews with your suppliers and clients. After the agent left, Richard sat alone in his office, staring at the phone. He needed to call Vanessa, but first he had to figure out what had gone wrong. The tax situation was a mess. He had been fudging numbers for years, thinking no one would notice. And the money from the joint accounts? He had always told himself that was his money too, since he was the one earning it. But now, looking at it through official eyes, he could see how it might appear suspicious. His phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Dinner tonight at Chez Laurent. Wear your good suit. I have something to celebrate. Richard stared at the message. Vanessa was celebrating while his world was starting to crumble. He couldn't tell her about the tax investigation, not yet. She was so proud of their success, so excited about their future together. This would ruin everything. He would handle it himself. Pay whatever fines they wanted, straighten out the paperwork, make this go away before Vanessa found out. After all, how serious could it really be? That evening, sitting across from Vanessa in the expensive restaurant, watching her glow with happiness as she talked about their plans, Richard managed to smile and nod at all the right moments. But in the back of his mind, a small voice was whispering that maybe, just maybe, things weren't as simple as they had seemed. Naomi had given up too easily. The divorce had been too clean. And now, suddenly, everyone was looking at his finances at once. But that was impossible. Naomi was just a housewife. She didn't have the connections or the knowledge to cause this kind of trouble. Did she? 3 weeks later, the first real fight happened on a Tuesday evening. Richard came home from another stressful day of meetings with accountants and lawyers to find Vanessa pacing around her apartment, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice sharp with frustration. No, Mr. Patterson, you cannot postpone payment again, she was saying. My retainer agreement was very clear about the payment schedule. She paused, listening, then snapped, I don't care about your cash flow problems. That's not my concern. She hung up and turned to Richard, her face flushed with anger. Third client this month trying to delay payment. It's like everyone suddenly thinks lawyers work for free. Richard set down his briefcase carefully. Maybe they're just having temporary difficulties. The economy's been rough on small businesses. Don't give me that, Vanessa said, pouring herself a large glass of wine. These people signed contracts. They made commitments. I held up my end of the bargain. Of course you did, Richard said soothingly. You're an excellent lawyer. Excellent lawyers get paid on time, she replied, taking a long sip. Richard, we need to talk about money. The words hit him like cold water. What about money? I've been looking at the numbers for the house we want in Millfield Heights. The down payment alone is $200,000. Vanessa sat down at her dining table and pulled out a notebook covered in calculations. With your settlement money and the sale of your old house, plus my savings, we should be able to manage it. But these late payments are making things tight. Richard felt his chest constrict. Over the past 3 weeks, his financial situation had become increasingly complicated. The state tax investigation was ongoing, and his lawyer had advised him to set aside money for potential penalties. 2 of his biggest clients had delayed projects, citing budget concerns. And there were other problems he hadn't told Vanessa about. Actually, he said carefully, there might be some delays with the settlement money. Vanessa looked up sharply. What kind of delays? Just paperwork issues. You know how divorce proceedings can be. Lots of bureaucracy. It wasn't entirely a lie. There were paperwork issues, specifically, papers from Naomi's new lawyer demanding financial records, papers from the IRS asking for clarification on certain transactions, papers from suppliers who had somehow learned about his tax troubles and were now demanding immediate payment on past due accounts. How long of a delay? Vanessa's voice was cool, professional. I'm not sure. A few weeks, maybe a month. Vanessa set down her wine glass with more force than necessary. Richard, I already put an offer on the house. I told the seller we could close within 30 days. You what? Richard stared at her. Without talking to me first? I told you about the house last week. You said you loved it. I said it looked nice in the photos. That's not the same as agreeing to buy it. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. So now you're backing out? After all the plans we made? I'm not backing out. I'm just saying we need to be realistic about the timing. Realistic? Vanessa stood up, her voice rising. Richard, I've been carrying most of the expenses for this relationship. My apartment, most of our dinners out, even your new wardrobe. I did that because I believed you when you said the settlement would make us financially comfortable. Richard felt his temper flare. I've been contributing. I pay for groceries, gas, entertainment. Small things, Vanessa interrupted. I'm talking about real money. Real commitments. She began pacing again. Do you know what I gave up for this relationship? I could have married Thomas Patterson, the real estate developer. He's worth millions. Then maybe you should have, Richard shot back. The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa stared at him, her face pale. What did you say? Richard immediately regretted his words. I didn't mean that. I'm just stressed about work, about the money situation. What money situation exactly? Vanessa's voice was dangerously quiet. Richard, is there something you're not telling me? He looked at her face, saw the suspicion growing in her eyes, and made a decision that would haunt him later. There's a problem with my business taxes. Nothing major, just some discrepancies that need to be sorted out. What kind of discrepancies? The kind that require me to set aside money for potential fines while they investigate. Richard slumped into a chair. It could tie up most of my liquid assets for months. Vanessa was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice had changed completely. How much money are we talking about? Maybe 50,000. Maybe more. 50,000? Vanessa's voice rose to a near shriek. Richard, that's most of your settlement money. That's our house down payment. I know. But it's temporary. Once the investigation is over, everything will go back to normal. Vanessa laughed, but there was no humor in it. Normal? Richard, what if they find serious problems? What if you owe more than 50,000? Richard couldn't meet her eyes. The truth was, he was terrified. His accountant had estimated potential penalties and back taxes could reach 6 figures if the investigation expanded. That won't happen. You don't know that. Vanessa picked up her wine glass and drained it. God, I can't believe this. Here I was, planning our future, and you're sitting on a potential financial disaster. It's not a disaster. It's just a setback. A setback? Vanessa's voice was getting shrill. Richard, I turned down other opportunities for this relationship. I defended you to my colleagues when they said you were beneath me. I invested in us. Invested in us? Or invested in what you thought I was worth? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Vanessa's face went through several expressions before settling on cold calculation. Maybe I need to reconsider my priorities, she said quietly. That night, Richard lay awake in Vanessa's bed, listening to her breathe beside him. But he could tell she wasn't sleeping either. The easy intimacy they had shared was gone, replaced by a tension that seemed to fill the room. The next morning, Vanessa was distant, polite but cold. She made coffee for herself but not for him. She checked her phone constantly during breakfast, responding to messages with urgent efficiency. "I have to work late tonight," she said without looking up from her phone. "Don't wait up." "Vanessa, about yesterday." "Yesterday was very enlightening," she interrupted. "I learned some important things about communication and honesty in relationships." After she left, Richard sat alone in the apartment that suddenly felt too big and too small at the same time. Everything was falling apart and he couldn't understand how it had happened so quickly. His phone rang. The caller ID showed his business number. "Mr. Thompson?" It was Helen, his secretary, and she sounded nervous. "There are 2 men here from the IRS. They have a warrant to examine your financial records." Richard's blood turned to ice. "The IRS? Not the State Revenue Department?" "No, sir. Federal agents. They say this is related to suspected tax fraud and money laundering." Money laundering. The words echoed in Richard's head as he drove to his office. How had a simple tax discrepancy become a federal investigation? When he arrived, the agents were already going through his files with systematic efficiency. One of them, a woman with gray hair and steel-rimmed glasses, approached him. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Agent Morrison. We need to ask you some questions about your business practices and personal finances." "I want my lawyer present." "That's your right. But I should tell you, we have evidence of systematic tax evasion, fraudulent business practices, and potential identity theft." Agent Morrison's voice was matter-of-fact. "Someone has provided us with very detailed documentation of your activities." "Someone? Who?" "That information is confidential. But I can tell you that whoever it was had access to records going back several years. Very thorough records." Richard felt the world tilting around him. Naomi. Somehow, impossibly, this was connected to Naomi. But that was crazy. She was just a housewife. She didn't have access to his business records, didn't understand tax law, didn't have the connections to trigger a federal investigation. Did she? That evening, Richard returned to Vanessa's apartment to find her packing a suitcase. "Going somewhere?" he asked, though his heart already knew the answer. "My sister's house. For a few days." Vanessa didn't look at him as she folded clothes into the bag. "I need some space to think." "Vanessa, we can work through this." She finally looked at him, and her expression was nothing like the woman who had laughed in the courtroom just weeks ago. "Can we?" "Richard, I found out about the IRS investigation. It's all over the legal community. Do you know what this is doing to my reputation?" "Your reputation?" "I'm the lawyer who helped the tax fraud case through divorce court. My colleagues are already whispering about whether I knew, whether I was complicit." Her voice was bitter. "I've worked too hard to build my career to let it be destroyed by your problems." "So that's it? You're just leaving?" Vanessa zipped up her suitcase with sharp, angry movements. "I'm protecting myself. Something you should have thought about before you decided to play games with the federal government." After she left, Richard sat alone in the apartment, surrounded by the remnants of the life they had planned together. The house listings scattered on the coffee table. The wine glasses they had toasted with just days ago. The framed photo of them at the restaurant where they had celebrated their victory over Naomi. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Karma is a beautiful thing. A friend." Richard stared at the message, his hands shaking. Someone was playing a game with him and he was losing badly. But who? And why? The scared, helpless woman he had mocked in court couldn't possibly be behind this. Could she? Dr. Patricia Sterling sat in her law office, reviewing the latest updates from her team. Spread across her desk were photographs, financial records, court documents, and transcripts of recorded conversations. The case against Richard Thompson and Vanessa Rivers was building into something larger than even she had anticipated. "The Bar Association complaint is ready for filing," her associate, Michael, reported. "We have documentation of at least 6 ethical violations by Ms. Rivers, including the attempted bribery of court personnel and intimidation of unrepresented parties." Patricia nodded, making notes on a legal pad. "What about the tax fraud investigation?" "The IRS is moving faster than expected. They found evidence of systematic underreporting going back 5 years. Mr. Thompson wasn't just hiding income from his business, he was creating fake expenses, claiming personal purchases as business deductions, even reporting fictional employees to claim tax credits." "And the money laundering charges?" Michael pulled out a thick folder. "That's where it gets interesting. Thompson was moving money through shell companies supposedly for business purposes. But the companies don't actually exist, they're just bank accounts with official-sounding names. The money would go out as consulting fees and come back as project payments, making it look like he had more legitimate business income than he actually did. Patricia whistled low. He's been running a one-man crime organization and calling it a construction company. It gets worse. We found evidence that he's been using stolen social security numbers to create these fake companies. Identity theft, fraud, tax evasion, he's looking at serious federal time. Across town, Naomi sat in James Richardson's office, reviewing the same reports from a different perspective. Where Patricia saw legal strategy, Naomi saw justice finally taking shape. The beauty of this, James said, is that we didn't have to manufacture anything. We just had to point the right people in the right direction and let them do their jobs. What about Vanessa? She's in deeper trouble than she knows. The Barr investigation is just the beginning. James pulled out a different set of documents. 3 of her former clients have come forward with complaints about her billing practices. Apparently, she's been charging for work she never did, claiming expenses that don't exist. How did you find them? We didn't have to. Once word got out that someone was looking into her practice, people started coming forward on their own. Seems she's been making enemies for years. Naomi leaned back in her chair, thinking about the woman who had laughed at her in court, who had mocked her intelligence and dismissed her worth. I want to make sure this is done right. I don't want any questions about the evidence or the investigation. There won't be. Everything we've provided to the authorities is legitimate documentation of actual crimes. We're not framing anyone, we're just making sure their real crimes don't stay hidden. James paused, studying Naomi's face. Are you having second thoughts? No, Naomi said firmly. They made their choices. Richard chose to steal from me, lie to me, betray me. Vanessa chose to help him, to mock me, to try to destroy my life for their benefit. I'm just making sure they face the consequences of those choices. That afternoon, Vanessa sat in her law office, staring at the formal complaint from the State Bar Association. The letterhead was imposing, the language was clinical, but the meaning was clear. Her career was in serious jeopardy. Ms. Rivers? Her secretary knocked on the door. Mr. Patterson is here to see you. Thomas Patterson. The wealthy real estate developer she had mentioned to Richard. The one she had turned down for what she thought was a better opportunity. Now he was here, probably wanting to gloat. Send him in. Thomas entered with the confident stride of a man who had never doubted his own worth. At 52 he was distinguished, successful, and completely out of her league now that her career was crumbling. Vanessa, he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. I heard about your troubles. I'm sure you did. The legal community loves good gossip. I'm not here to gossip, Thomas said seriously. I'm here to offer you a way out. Vanessa looked up sharply. What kind of way out? Cooperation. Information. A chance to save your career before it's completely destroyed. I don't understand. Thomas leaned forward. Vanessa, you're not the target here. You're collateral damage. Someone is systematically destroying Richard Thompson, and you got caught in the crossfire because you were sleeping with him. How do you know that? Because I know who's behind this. Thomas's voice was quiet, serious. And I know why. Vanessa felt her heart racing. Who? His ex-wife. Naomi Rodriguez. That's impossible. She's just a housewife. She has no money, no connections, no power. Thomas laughed, but there was no humor in it. Vanessa, Naomi Rodriguez is one of the most successful business owners in this city. She owns parts of companies worth hundreds of millions of dollars. She has connections that reach into every major industry, including government agencies. The room seemed to spin around Vanessa. That can't be true. It is true. And you helped her ex-husband steal from her for years without knowing it. The money he was using to support his lifestyle? It came from her accounts. The business he claimed to have built himself? It was funded with her investments. Vanessa thought about the divorce papers, about how easily Naomi had given up what they thought was everything. She knew. She knew we were stealing from her. She knew, and she let you do it while she documented every crime, every lie, every ethical violation. Thomas stood up. She's been planning this for months, maybe years. And now she's watching you and Richard destroy each other while she moves on with her life. Why are you telling me this? Because I don't like seeing people get destroyed unnecessarily. Richard made his choices, he's a criminal, and he deserves what's coming to him. But you were manipulated, used as a tool in someone else's revenge plan. Thomas pulled out a business card and placed it on her desk. The number on this card is for a lawyer who specializes in bar association defenses. If you call him today, if you cooperate fully with the investigations, you might be able to save your license. What kind of cooperation? Tell them everything. About Richard's business practices, about the money laundering, about the fake companies. Show them that you were an unwitting accomplice, not a willing participant. After Thomas left, Vanessa sat alone in her office, staring at the business card. Everything she had believed about the past few months was a lie. Naomi wasn't a victim, she was the architect of their destruction. And the most terrifying part was realizing how thoroughly they had been outplayed by someone they had dismissed as worthless. Richard, meanwhile, was learning the same truth in a much more direct way. He sat in his lawyer's office, listening to explanations about federal charges and potential prison sentences, when his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but when he answered, the voice was familiar. "Hello, Richard," was Naomi. But not the scared, broken woman from the courthouse. This voice was calm, confident, completely in control. "Naomi? How did you get this number?" "I've had this number for years, Richard. Just like I've had access to all your business records, all your financial information, all your lies." Richard's lawyer looked up sharply at the mention of lies. "I don't know what you think you're doing," Richard said, "but this harassment needs to stop." Naomi laughed, and the sound was nothing like the nervous giggles she used to make when he criticized her. "Harassment? Richard, I haven't done anything to you. I've simply allowed the truth to come to light." "What truth?" "The truth about who you really are. A thief. A fraud. A man who spent 15 years stealing from his own wife while telling her she was worthless." Richard felt his chest tightening. "I never stole from you. Everything I built myself. With my money. Money you took from accounts you thought I didn't understand, money you used to fund a business you claimed was entirely yours." Naomi's voice remained eerily calm. "Did you really think I was so stupid that I wouldn't notice? Or did you just not care? You're bluffing. You don't have that kind of information. I have everything, Richard. Every forged signature, every fake invoice, every illegal transaction. I've been documenting your crimes for years, waiting for the right moment to use them." Richard looked at his lawyer, who was taking notes with growing concern. "What do you want?" "I don't want anything from you," Naomi said. "I never did. I wanted a husband who loved me, respected me, treated me as an equal. Instead, I got a man who saw me as an obstacle to overcome." "Naomi, if this is about the divorce, we can renegotiate." "This isn't about the divorce, Richard. This is about justice. You made your choices and now you get to live with the consequences." The line went dead, leaving Richard staring at his phone in horror. His lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Thompson, I think we need to discuss the possibility of a plea agreement." The text message came at 6:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning. "Meet me at Murphy's Diner. Come alone." Richard stared at his phone, lying in the spare bedroom of his friend's apartment where he had been staying since Vanessa kicked him out. In the 3 weeks since the federal investigation began, his life had crumbled with astonishing speed. His business accounts were frozen, his office was sealed with federal tape, and he was facing potential charges that could put him in prison for decades. Murphy's Diner was a rundown place on the wrong side of town, the kind of establishment that existed in cash transactions and minded its own business. Richard found Vanessa in a corner booth, wearing dark sunglasses despite the overcast morning. She looked nothing like the confident woman who had laughed in the courthouse. Her red hair was pulled back severely, her designer clothes had been replaced with a simple black sweater, and her hands shook slightly as she lifted her coffee cup. "You look terrible," she said without preamble. "Thanks. You're not exactly glowing yourself." Richard slid into the booth across from her. "Why did you want to meet?" "Because we need to talk about what happens next." Vanessa lowered her voice. "Richard, I know who's behind this." "Behind what?" "All of it. The investigation, the bar complaint, the timing of everything." She leaned forward. "It's Naomi." Richard laughed bitterly. "That's impossible. Naomi is one of the wealthiest women in the city," Vanessa interrupted. "She owns companies, Richard. Real companies worth real money. She's been playing us from the beginning." Richard felt the blood drain from his face. "What are you talking about?" Vanessa pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. "I did some research after I figured out we were being set up. Naomi Rodriguez, that's her maiden name, has been building a business empire for over a decade. She owns pieces of tech companies, real estate developments, renewable energy projects." Richard opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were articles from business journals, corporate filings, photos of Naomi at industry events wearing clothes that cost more than he made in a month. In every image, she looked confident, successful, completely different from the woman he had lived with for 15 years. "This can't be real," he whispered. "It's real. While you thought she was reading romance novels, she was managing investment portfolios. While you thought she was watering plants, she was negotiating million-dollar contracts." Vanessa's voice was bitter. "We walked into court thinking we were taking candy from a baby, and instead we tried to rob a lioness." Richard studied a photograph of Naomi shaking hands with the governor at some renewable energy summit. The woman in the photo was poised, professional, clearly at home in a room full of powerful people. How is this possible? How did I live with her for 15 years and not know any of this? Because she didn't want you to know. Think about it, Richard. Every time you dismissed her ideas, every time you told her to leave the business world to people who understood it, she just smiled and nodded. She let you think you were superior while she built something you couldn't even comprehend. The diner suddenly felt too hot, too small. Richard loosened his tie. The joint accounts, the money I was using for the business, was hers. All of it. Vanessa pulled out another document. "I found the real financial records. Your successful construction business was being subsidized by her investments. You were never successful, Richard. You were being supported by a woman you thought was worthless." Richard thought about all the times he had bragged to his friends about how he was the breadwinner, how he supported his unemployed wife. All the times he had felt superior because he was the one bringing in money. She was supporting me? She was supporting you, and you repaid her by stealing from her, cheating on her, and trying to destroy her in court. Vanessa's voice was getting sharper. "Richard, we didn't just commit tax fraud and identity theft. We tried to rob one of the most powerful businesswomen in the state. But why didn't she fight back? Why did she let us think we were winning? Because she knew something we didn't. She knew that if she gave us enough rope, we would hang ourselves." Vanessa pulled off her sunglasses, revealing dark circles under her eyes. "She documented everything, Richard. Every crime, every lie, every unethical thing we did. She was building a case against us from the beginning." Richard felt nauseous. "The phone call yesterday. She knew about the federal charges before I did. She probably knew about them before the agents did. Richard, she has connections in government, in banking, and law enforcement. She didn't just report our crimes, she probably helped plan the investigation." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their situation settling over them like a heavy blanket. Finally Richard spoke. "What do we do now?" "We." Vanessa laughed harshly. "There is no we anymore, Richard. I'm trying to save my career and you're trying to stay out of prison. Those are two very different problems. Vanessa, we're in this together. If we work as a team." "A team?" Vanessa's voice rose slightly before she caught herself and looked around the diner. "Richard, you lied to me about your financial problems. You made me an accessory to your crimes without telling me. You destroyed my reputation and my career because you were too arrogant to see what was right in front of you. I never meant for any of this to happen. You meant every bit of it. You meant to steal from your wife. You meant to cheat on her. You meant to humiliate her in court." Vanessa stood up, leaving money on the table for her coffee. "The only thing you didn't mean was to get caught." "Where are you going?" "To see my lawyer. The one who's going to help me explain to the Bar Association how I was manipulated by a criminal who lied about his financial situation and legal status." She picked up her purse. "I'm going to tell them the truth, Richard. All of it." "Vanessa, wait." But she was already walking away, leaving Richard alone in the diner with a folder full of evidence that his entire life had been built on lies he had told himself. That afternoon, Richard drove past his old house, the one he had shared with Naomi, the one he had thought he owned, the one that was now part of a federal investigation. There was a for sale sign in the yard, but it wasn't from any realtor he recognized. On impulse, he called the number on the sign. "Rodriguez Properties," a professional voice answered. "I'm calling about the house for sale on Maple Street. The Thompson property." "Yes, that's one of ours. Are you interested in viewing it?" "Rodriguez Properties," Richard repeated slowly. "Is the owner's name Naomi Rodriguez?" "I'm sorry, but I can't discuss ownership details with non-clients. Would you like to schedule a showing?" Richard hung up without answering. Even his house, the house he had thought he was taking from her in the divorce, belonged to her. How long had she owned it? How long had he been living in a home that wasn't his, supported by money that wasn't his, married to a woman whose true worth he had never even suspected? His phone rang. The caller ID showed his lawyer's number. "Richard, we need to meet immediately," his lawyer said without preamble. "The prosecutor has made an offer." "What kind of offer?" "Full confession, complete cooperation, and 15 years in federal prison. It's a good deal, considering the charges you're facing." 15 years. Richard would be almost 60 when he got out, if he got out. His business would be gone, his reputation destroyed, his entire life reduced to a number in the federal prison system. "What if I don't take the deal?" "Then you go to trial, and if they convict you on all charges, you're looking at life in prison." "Richard, they have documentation of crimes going back a decade. They have recorded conversations, financial records, witness testimony. This isn't a case you can win." That evening, Richard sat alone in his friend's spare bedroom, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere across town, Naomi was probably having dinner in her real home, planning her real future with people who understood her real worth. She had moved on completely while he was trapped in the wreckage of the life he had thought he was building. He thought about calling her, trying to apologize, trying to make her understand that he had never meant to hurt her so badly. But what could he say? That he was sorry for spending 15 years stealing from her while telling her she was worthless? That he was sorry for betraying her trust while she was quietly building an empire he couldn't have imagined? The truth was, he wasn't sorry for trying to leave her. He was sorry for getting caught. And somewhere in that realization, Richard finally understood exactly what kind of man he really was. The morning the news broke, Richard woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. His phone had been buzzing since dawn, but he had ignored it, hoping for just a few more hours of sleep before facing another day of legal meetings and financial ruin. The first message was from his sister. "Richard, what the hell is happening? It's all over the news." The second was from his former business partner. "Dude, are you seeing this? Channel 7 is running your mug shot every 10 minutes. Richard stumbled to the television and turned on the local news. His stomach dropped as he saw his own face filling the screen, his federal booking photo, looking haggard and defeated. The banner across the bottom read, "Local businessman charged with identity theft, tax fraud, money laundering." Richard Thompson, owner of Thompson Construction Services, was arrested yesterday on federal charges stemming from a multi-year investigation into his business practices, the news anchor was saying. According to court documents, Thompson allegedly created fake companies using stolen Social Security numbers and systematically underreported income to avoid paying taxes. The story continued with details Richard hadn't even known were public. The fake employee scheme, the shell companies, the money laundering operation. But then the reporter said something that made Richard's blood freeze. Perhaps most shocking of all, investigators say Thompson was stealing from his own wife, using money from her investment accounts to fund his fraudulent business operations. The wife, identified as Naomi Rodriguez, is reportedly a successful entrepreneur with interests in multiple industries. The screen switched to footage of Naomi leaving what appeared to be a corporate office building. She was wearing a tailored business suit, her hair styled professionally, walking with the confidence of someone who owned the building behind her. She looked nothing like the woman Richard had dismissed as a housewife. Ms. Rodriguez declined to comment on her ex-husband's arrest, the reporter continued, but sources close to the investigation say her cooperation was instrumental in building the case against Thompson. Richard sank into a chair, remote control falling from nerveless fingers. Instrumental in building the case. She hadn't just reported his crime, she had helped construct his downfall, brick by brick, lie by lie. His phone rang. Vanessa's name appeared on the screen. "Are you watching the news?" she asked without preamble. "Yeah. They're destroying us, Richard. Completely destroying us." Her voice was shaky, desperate. "They're calling me your accomplice. They're saying I helped you steal from your wife." "Did you know?" Richard asked quietly. "About Naomi's money, about what she really was?" "Of course I didn't know. Do you think I would have gone along with this if I knew we were trying to rob someone with real power?" Vanessa's voice was getting hysterical. "Richard, I lost everything. My practice is finished, my reputation is ruined, and the Bar Association is threatening criminal charges." "Join the club," Richard said bitterly. "This is your fault," Vanessa snapped. "All of it. I was a successful lawyer with a good reputation before I met you. I had clients, respect, a future. And you destroyed it all with your lies and your crimes. I never forced you to do anything. You lied to me about everything. You made me think you were successful, that your wife was worthless, that we were taking what you deserved. You turned me into a criminal without me even knowing it." The line went quiet for a moment. When Vanessa spoke again, her voice was cold, calculating. "Richard, I want you to know something. I'm testifying against you." "What?" My lawyer worked out a deal. I cooperate fully, provide evidence about your criminal activities, and they recommend leniency on the bar sanctions. Her voice was steady now, businesslike. I'm going to tell them everything, Richard. Every crime you committed, every lie you told, every detail of how you manipulated me into helping you. Vanessa, you can't. I can and I will. You destroyed my life, Richard. Now I'm going to make sure justice is served. She hung up, leaving Richard alone with the television still broadcasting his humiliation to the entire city. By noon, the story had expanded. Richard's former clients were being interviewed, talking about late payments and shoddy work. His suppliers were discussing unpaid bills and broken contracts. Former employees were coming forward with stories about wage theft and illegal working conditions. But the worst part was watching Naomi's story unfold alongside his own destruction. The local business journal ran a feature article about her success, complete with photos from industry events and quotes from prominent businesspeople who spoke about her intelligence and integrity. Naomi Rodriguez represents the best of American entrepreneurship, one CEO was quoted as saying. She built her success through hard work, smart investments, and ethical business practices. The fact that her own husband was stealing from her while she was achieving so much makes his crimes even more reprehensible. Another article detailed her charitable work, her contributions to education and renewable energy, her role as a mentor to other women in business. The woman Richard had dismissed as worthless was being celebrated as a role model. That evening, Richard's lawyer called with news that made everything worse. The prosecutor wants to meet tomorrow, he said. Richard, they've added charges. Domestic financial abuse, spousal identity theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud. How many years am I looking at now? If convicted on all charges? 25 to life. The lawyer's voice was grim. Richard, this isn't just about tax evasion anymore. They're treating this as organized crime. The fake companies, the stolen identities, the systematic theft from your wife, they're calling it a criminal enterprise. What about the plea deal? Still on the table, but the terms have changed. 20 years, not 15. And you have to make full restitution to your wife for all the money you stole. How much restitution? Based on their calculations? Just over $2 million. Richard felt the room spinning around him. $2 million. Money he had spent over the years on his business, his lifestyle, his affair with Vanessa. Money that had never been his to begin with. That night, unable to sleep, Richard found himself driving through the city. Without planning to, he ended up in the parking lot across from Naomi's office building. It was after midnight, but several floors were still lit, including what he now knew was her corporate headquarters. As he watched, a black sedan pulled up to the building's entrance. Naomi got out, followed by a tall man in an expensive suit. Even from a distance, Richard could see the easy familiarity between them, the way the man's hand rested gently on her back as they walked into the building together. James Richardson. Richard recognized him from the business pages, where he was frequently mentioned as one of the city's most successful investors. Apparently, Naomi had moved on in more ways than one. Richard sat in his car, watching the windows where she probably worked late into the night, building something real and valuable while he sat in a borrowed bed, waiting for a prison sentence that would steal the rest of his life. For the first time since this all began, Richard truly understood what he had lost. Not just his freedom, not just his business, but the chance to be married to an extraordinary woman who had loved him despite his flaws, who had supported him despite his failures, who had built something amazing while he was too blind to see it. And now it was too late. Too late for apologies, too late for second chances, too late for anything except accepting the consequences of 15 years of lies. As he drove away, Richard realized that the saddest part wasn't going to prison. The saddest part was finally understanding exactly how much he had thrown away, and knowing he would never get the chance to try again. 6 months after Richard's arrest, Naomi stood on the balcony of her penthouse apartment, looking out over the city she had quietly conquered while her ex-husband thought she was watering plants. The morning sun caught the glass and steel of the financial district, where 3 buildings now housed companies she owned or had invested in. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. Ready for the big announcement today? She smiled, typing back, ready to change the world. Today was the day they would officially announce the merger of their companies into Rodriguez Richardson Enterprises, a billion-dollar corporation focused on renewable energy and sustainable technology. The press conference was scheduled for 2 o'clock, and by evening, the business world would know that Naomi Rodriguez wasn't just successful, she was a force of nature. Second thoughts? James asked as he joined her on the balcony, carrying 2 cups of coffee. None at all. Naomi replied, accepting her cup. I spent 15 years hiding who I was. I'm done with that. James studied her face, the face he had fallen in love with long before she was free to love him back. Any regrets about how everything went down with Richard? Naomi considered the question seriously. I regret that it took me so long to see who he really was. I regret that I wasted 15 years trying to make a marriage work with someone who saw me as an obstacle to overcome rather than a partner to cherish. She sipped her coffee. But I don't regret letting him face the consequences of his choices. The trial starts next week. I know. I'll testify when they call me, tell the truth about what he did, and then I'll come home to the life I've built. Naomi turned to face James fully. Richard made his choices, James. He chose to steal from me, to betray me, to try to destroy me in court. I just made sure he couldn't hide from those choices forever. That afternoon, the press conference was everything Naomi had hoped it would be. The main conference room at the Marriott downtown was packed with reporters, business leaders, and politicians eager to associate themselves with the city's newest power couple. When Naomi and James walked to the podium together, the cameras flashed like lightning. Ladies and gentlemen, Naomi began, her voice carrying easily through the room, today marks the beginning of a new chapter in sustainable business development. Rodriguez Richardson Enterprises represents more than just a merger of two successful companies. It represents a commitment to building a better future for our community and our planet. The questions came fast and professional. About the merger details, about their expansion plans, about their vision for renewable energy. But eventually, one reporter asked the question Naomi had been expecting. Ms. Rodriguez, your ex-husband's trial for fraud and theft begins next week. How has this personal situation affected your business decisions? Naomi had prepared for this moment, had practiced her response until it was perfect. My ex-husband's legal troubles are the result of his own choices and actions. They have no bearing on my business operations or my commitment to ethical corporate practices. I've spent my career building something positive and sustainable, and that work continues regardless of anyone else's decisions. Another reporter raised her hand. There are reports that you were instrumental in the investigation that led to his arrest. Can you comment on that? I cooperated fully with law enforcement when they requested information about financial irregularities, Naomi replied smoothly. As any citizen should. My focus now is on building something positive for our community, not looking backward at past mistakes mine or anyone else's. James stepped forward. If there are no more questions about our business announcement, we'd like to share some exciting details about our first major project. For the next hour, they discussed plans for a renewable energy campus that would create 500 jobs and power 30,000 homes with clean electricity. By the time the press conference ended, the focus had shifted completely away from Richard's crimes and onto Naomi's vision for the future. That evening they celebrated at Chez Laurent, the same restaurant where Richard and Vanessa had planned their victory just months earlier. But where Richard and Vanessa had been planning to spend money they had stolen, Naomi and James were planning to invest money they had earned through intelligence, hard work, and ethical business practices. To new beginnings, James said, raising his glass of champagne. To truth, Naomi replied, touching her glass to his. And to the people who see our real worth. Across town, in a much different setting, Richard sat in his holding cell, reading about the press conference in the evening newspaper. The article was accompanied by a large photo of Naomi and James, both looking confident and successful, announcing plans that would change thousands of lives for the better. He read every word, studying the face of the woman he had dismissed as worthless. In the photo, she was glowing with happiness and purpose, surrounded by people who respected her intelligence and valued her contributions. She looked nothing like the scared woman who had signed divorce papers months ago, and everything like the powerful executive she had always been. His cellmate, a man named Frank who was awaiting trial for embezzlement, looked over his shoulder at the newspaper. You know her? She's my ex-wife, Richard said quietly. Frank whistled low. Man, that's rough. She looks like she's doing pretty well for herself. She always was. I just never bothered to notice. What did you do to mess that up? Richard folded the newspaper carefully. Everything I could possibly do wrong. Meanwhile, Vanessa sat in her studio apartment, the same newspaper spread on her small kitchen table. Her legal career was over. The Bar Association had suspended her license pending the outcome of Richard's trial, and even if she avoided criminal charges, no law firm would ever hire her again. She had taken a job as a paralegal at a small firm that handled personal injury cases, work that paid a quarter of what she used to make and offered none of the prestige she had spent years building. Her expensive apartment was gone, along with her car, her jewelry, and most of her designer wardrobe. But the worst part wasn't the financial hardship. The worst part was the knowledge that she had destroyed herself for a man who had never been worth the sacrifice. Richard had never been successful, never been wealthy, never been anything more than a small-time criminal with delusions of grandeur. She had given up everything for him, her ethics, her reputation, her future, and in return, he had made her an accomplice to crimes she hadn't even understood she was committing. The newspaper showed Naomi in a designer gown that probably cost more than Vanessa's monthly salary, standing next to a man who clearly adored and respected her. They looked like equals, like partners in every sense of the word. Vanessa thought about the woman she had mocked in the courthouse, the woman she had dismissed as too scared to speak. That woman had been playing a game Vanessa hadn't even known existed, and now Naomi was celebrating her victory while Vanessa was paying the price for her ignorance. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed her mother's number. "Vanessa, honey, I saw the news about your friend's ex-wife, the successful businesswoman." Her mother's voice was careful, diplomatic. "She seems very impressive." "She's not my friend, Mom." "And yes, she's impressive. Honey, I have to ask, if she was so successful, why did you and Richard think you could take advantage of her in the divorce?" Vanessa closed her eyes. "Because we didn't know who she really was. We thought she was just a housewife with no money and no power. But surely there were signs? Successful people don't usually hide their success completely. There had been signs, Vanessa realized now. The way Naomi had dressed simply, but the clothes had been well made, expensive in a subtle way. The way she had carried herself in court, not scared, but watchful, calculating. The way she had asked quiet, intelligent questions about the legal process. "She let us think what we wanted to think," Vanessa said finally. "And we were too arrogant to look any deeper." After hanging up, Vanessa sat alone in her small apartment, surrounded by the remnants of her former life. She had lost everything because she had chosen to ally herself with a criminal, because she had been too greedy to ask the right questions, because she had underestimated a woman who turned out to be smarter and more powerful than she could have imagined. Tomorrow she would go to her job as a paralegal, doing work that law students could handle, trying to rebuild a career that would never reach the heights she had once achieved. Richard would go to prison for decades, if not life. And Naomi would continue building an empire that would outlast both of their failures. The game was over, and there was no question who had won. But as Vanessa turned off the lights in her small apartment, she realized that the most painful part wasn't losing to Naomi. The most painful part was understanding, finally, that Naomi had never been playing against them at all. She had simply been waiting for them to destroy themselves. 1 year later, the federal courthouse was packed for the final day of Richard Thompson's trial. Naomi sat in the witness section, wearing a navy blue suit that spoke of quiet confidence and unshakable integrity. She had testified 3 days earlier, her voice steady and clear as she detailed 15 years of financial abuse, theft, and betrayal. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Rebecca Martinez, was delivering her closing argument to a jury that had heard weeks of evidence about Richard's crimes. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about more than tax evasion or financial fraud. This is about a man who systematically stole from his own wife while convincing her she was worthless. This is about a man who built his entire life on lies and theft, then tried to destroy the woman who had supported him when she finally said enough." Richard sat at the defendant's table, looking nothing like the confident man who had smirked in divorce court just over a year ago. Prison had aged him, and the weight of his crimes had broken something fundamental in his spirit. His lawyer, a court-appointed public defender, had done his best with an impossible case, but the evidence was overwhelming. "The defendant didn't just steal money," Martinez continued. "He stole identity, dignity, and 15 years of his wife's life. He used her success to fund his failures, then tried to convince the world that she was the failure. But truth has a way of coming to light, and today justice will be served." When the jury returned after 3 hours of deliberation, their verdict was swift and decisive. Guilty on all counts. Richard showed no emotion as the judge read the charges. Identity theft, tax evasion, money laundering, domestic financial abuse, and conspiracy to commit fraud. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Patricia Williams said, her voice carrying the weight of years on the bench, "your crimes represent a profound betrayal of trust and a systematic abuse of power. You stole not just money but dignity, security, and peace of mind from a woman who deserved better. The court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for 15 years. Behind him, Richard could hear his sister crying softly. Ahead of him, he could see Naomi sitting calmly, her face showing neither satisfaction nor sadness, just the quiet peace of someone who had finally seen justice done. As the bailiffs led Richard away in shackles, he caught Naomi's eye for just a moment. She looked at him with what might have been pity, but there was no anger, no hatred, no desire for revenge. She had moved so far beyond him that he was simply irrelevant to her life now. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around Naomi and her legal team. Patricia Sterling, her lawyer, made a brief statement about justice being served and the importance of holding financial abusers accountable. When it was Naomi's turn to speak, her words were measured and thoughtful. "Today's verdict brings closure to a difficult chapter in my life," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the crisp autumn air. "But I want to be clear about something. This was never about revenge. This was about ensuring that no one is above the law, regardless of their relationship to their victims." A reporter raised his hand. "Ms. Rodriguez, do you have any message for other women who might be experiencing financial abuse?" Naomi paused, thinking about the woman she had been just a year ago, sitting in that same courthouse, pretending to be powerless while she planned her ex-husband's downfall. "My message is simple. Know your worth. Understand your value. And never, ever let anyone convince you that you're less than you are." "What's next for you and Rodriguez Richardson Enterprises?" "Growth," Naomi replied with a smile. "We're breaking ground on 3 new renewable energy projects next month, and we expect to create over 2,000 jobs in the next 2 years. My focus is on building a better future, not dwelling on past mistakes." As the crowd dispersed, James appeared at Naomi's side, slipping his hand into hers. They walked toward their car together, equal partners in business and in life. "How do you feel?" he asked quietly. "Free," Naomi said simply. "For the first time in 15 years, completely free." That evening they attended the annual Business Leadership Awards dinner, where Naomi was being honored as Entrepreneur of the Year. The ballroom was filled with the city's most successful and influential people, all of whom now knew exactly who Naomi Rodriguez was and what she had accomplished. As she stood at the podium to accept her award, Naomi looked out over a room full of people who respected her intelligence, valued her contributions, and saw her as an equal. It was everything she had dreamed of during those long years of hiding her success, everything she had worked toward while her ex-husband dismissed her as worthless. "This award isn't just mine," she said to the audience. "It belongs to everyone who has ever been underestimated, everyone who has ever been told they weren't smart enough or strong enough or worthy enough. It belongs to everyone who kept working, kept building, kept believing in themselves even when the people closest to them couldn't see their worth." The applause was thunderous, lasting several minutes. When it finally died down, Naomi concluded with words that would be quoted in business magazines for years to come. "Success isn't about proving other people wrong," she said. "Success is about proving yourself right. It's about building something meaningful, something lasting, something that makes the world a little bit better. And sometimes the greatest victory is simply refusing to let other people's limitations become your own." Later that night, as Naomi and James sat on their balcony overlooking the city, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The scared woman who had sat in that courthouse, pretending to be powerless, seemed like a different person now. That woman had been playing a role, hiding her strength until the moment was right to reveal it. "Any regrets?" James asked, as he had so many times before. "Only one," Naomi said, surprising him. "What's that?" "I regret that it took me so long to stop hiding who I was. I regret all the years I spent making myself smaller so that someone else could feel bigger." She leaned into his embrace. "But I don't regret the journey. It taught me exactly what I'm worth, and it brought me to you." Miles away in his federal prison cell, Richard lay on his narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling. The newspaper coverage of Naomi's award had been extensive, and other inmates had made sure he saw every article. They found it amusing that someone in for financial crimes had been married to one of the city's most successful entrepreneurs without ever realizing it. Richard thought about the woman he had dismissed for 15 years, the woman who was now being celebrated as a visionary leader while he counted down the days until his first parole hearing 15 years in the future. He would be almost 60 when he got out, if he got out, and she would probably be running a business empire that spanned continents. For the first time since his arrest, Richard truly understood the magnitude of what he had lost. Not just his freedom, not just his business, but the chance to be married to an extraordinary woman who had loved him despite his flaws. He had thrown away the partnership of a lifetime because he had been too blind and too arrogant to see what was right in front of him. The saddest part was knowing that even if he could go back and do it all over again, he probably would have made the same mistakes. He had been so convinced of his own superiority, so certain that success was something only he could achieve, that he had never bothered to look closely at the woman sharing his life. As Richard closed his eyes and tried to sleep, he realized that Naomi had been right about one thing. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. And justice, he was learning, was sometimes the heaviest burden of all. Meanwhile, Vanessa Rivers, now working under her maiden name after the scandal destroyed her professional reputation, finished her shift at the small law firm where she worked as a paralegal. Her apartment was a one-bedroom unit in a neighborhood she used to drive through without stopping, and her car was a 10-year-old sedan that needed repairs she couldn't afford. But as she watched the news coverage of Naomi's award ceremony, Vanessa realized something that Richard probably never would. She had been given a second chance. Her legal license was suspended, not revoked. Her reputation was damaged, not destroyed. She could rebuild, slowly and carefully, if she was willing to do the work. It would take years to regain even a fraction of what she had lost, and she would never reach the heights she had once achieved. But she was free, she was alive, and she had learned something valuable from her fall. Success built on other people's suffering never lasts. The next morning, Vanessa enrolled in a business ethics course at the local community college. It was a small step, but it was a beginning. She had spent months blaming Richard for her downfall, but she was finally ready to accept responsibility for her own choices. She had chosen to mock a woman she didn't understand. She had chosen to participate in crimes she didn't investigate. She had chosen ambition over ethics, greed over integrity. But she could choose differently now. As Naomi Rodriguez Richardson sat in her corner office, planning the future of her billion-dollar enterprise, she occasionally thought about the people who had tried to destroy her. Not with anger or resentment, but with something approaching compassion. They had all made their choices. Richard had chosen crime over honesty, theft over work, betrayal over love. Vanessa had chosen greed over ethics, shortcuts over integrity, cruelty over kindness. And Naomi had chosen to let them reveal their true natures while she built something lasting and meaningful. The game was over, justice had been served, and the future belonged to those who understood that real success came not from tearing others down, but from building something worth building. The silent power had become a voice that would shape the world for generations to come.